Number 1. When I was about 12 years old, I was walking from my house to my cousin's house. We were on one street. My grandmother was a street over, my front yard overlooked her backyard, and my cousin was 2 streets over from mine. My grandmother's front yard overlooked my cousin's backyard. Now, I could have gone through my grandma's backyard, up her front yard, and go into my cousin's backyard, but I was a kid. I wanted the freedom of walking alone, so I took the long way down the street around the houses. I wasn't really paying much attention. I heard a car come up behind me slowly, but I thought it was someone who lived on that street. All of a sudden, I realize the car is inching its way behind me, following me. I turned around, and there were 2 men inside, all tatted up, bald, big guys. One of them said,
"Excuse me, can you help me?"
Still walking, I ask, "What?" The guy responds that he is lost and can't find his way to the highway. I point in the direction of the highway and keep walking away. The passenger goes,
"Why don't you get in and show us where it is? We'll drive you right back."
I didn't answer, just kept walking quicker. They wouldn't stop.
"Come on, you don't want us to get lost, do you? We won't hurt you. We just need some help. Where do you live? We promise to drive you right back home."
I started almost sprinting when they stopped the car and the passenger door jerked open. Just then, I was getting to my grandma's house. I ran into her driveway, around the corner, into the backyard, and across the street to my house. Panting, I ran towards my backyard, got in the house, ran upstairs, and looked out the window. The guys hadn't seen me run into my house, so they had no idea I was looking at them through my bedroom window. When I looked out, the 2 guys were looking for me in the bushes of my grandma's yard. I was shaking. Before I even had the chance to pick up the phone, they were gone. Number 2. When I was 21, I was living in Dublin as an exchange student at a university there, and I had friends from my home university studying around Europe at the same time. My home friends and I agreed to meet in Paris for a weekend. One of them was staying there and said we could crash at her flat. These plans required that I traveled alone, since I was the only one of the group studying in Dublin. In order to get from my flat to my friend's flat, I had to take a bus from my campus to the airport, take a flight to Charles de Gaulle, then navigate the metro from the airport to her place. The first 2 steps went fine. I should also mention this is the first time I traveled out of Ireland since being there, so naturally it was also my first encounter with an environment that didn't speak English by default. I immediately felt more alone than I wanted to. Once I arrived at Charles de Gaulle, I decided I wasn't in the mood to try to read French, so I decided to take a cab to my friend's flat. I asked an airport worker where I could go to find a taxi, and they just brushed me off or didn't understand English. As I'm walking away, a man comes up to me and says,
"You're looking for a taxi? So am I. I can show you where to find one."
I was relieved and quite honestly wasn't weirded out at all at this point. I walked with him and had small talk until he walked us into an elevator and went down to the lowest floor. The doors open to a parking lot that is dark, devoid of any people or vehicles except for one black car. In the distance, there is a glass corridor with travelers walking through, so I wasn't entirely alone. At least I was in eyesight of other people. Another man gets out of the car and pops the trunk. As I look to the first man, who says,
"We have a private taxi company. Please put your suitcase in the back and get in the car."
For some reason, I felt like bearing with them, so I asked for a taxi license, and they said they don't have one because they are a private company. They were very insistent that I get in the car, and I was noticing no taxi markings on it at all, and darkly tinted windows. At this point, I realized that the scenario makes no sense. This man introduced himself as someone looking for a cab along with me, and now he's a private taxi company employee? I turned around and confidently walked back towards the elevator and noticed they hadn't come after me. I have no idea if private taxi companies are a thing in Paris, but they either have very creepy ways of getting customers or they are a front for some type of abduction scheme. I went to the bathroom after that, and on the stall was posted a message in 5 different languages about human trafficking and to be vigilant at the airport. So that was unsettling. Number 3. On a rainy night in the era before cell phones, I was 18, walking a very long way home from work, and I foolishly accepted a ride from a strange man. Small-town girl living in her lonely world, and I had just gotten off a double shift. He was elderly, acted genuinely concerned for me, and I saw a Bible in the back seat. Probably safe, right? The car was old and broken down, and he had to get out to open the door for me. It took him a while, as he had trouble walking with a bum leg. He told me the passenger door didn't open from the inside. I immediately felt weird, but years of nice girl training told me he's gone to so much trouble. Don't say no. We chatted for a while, and he politely complimented my uniform, my hair, and told me I looked like his late wife, and that her spirit must have led him to help me get home. It sounded very sweet the way he told it. The conversation turned to if I was still in school, what my hobbies were like, and gradually turned to whether or not I was on my period, which was rude, but he acted like it was going to be the punchline of a joke, so I laughingly asked him why he would want to know. He said, very calmly,
Because if you're fertile, we should start trying for a family right away.
Oh my. He said that God had kept him lonely for years, but now, because I looked so much like his late wife, it was clear I was meant to be his, so he could start life over again and finally have lots of children like his wife was unable to do. He grabbed my hand and kissed it and said,
I can't wait to show you our new bed.
I told him I forgot something at work. He told me I could get it tomorrow. I told him I needed to pee, and he said I could hold it until we got home. He wasn't going to let me out. He kept talking about how things were different back then, and how men are the head of the household, that women are to follow their fathers and then their husbands, and God says this and God says that. He talked about his wedding day, how his wife's father had given her to him. So I blurted out, You're going to get my father's permission to marry me before taking me to your home, right? God would want that, right? You need to do that because otherwise we would be living in sin and the marriage bed is not holy, which I remembered from many days of church sermons. He got offended then and said he knew the Bible better than I did, and of course he knew to ask my father for permission. I told him that we couldn't live together in sin, and we should go to my house before going home, and I reminded him that the street wasn't far. Still trying to keep the conversation light and joking, I told him that's what a godly man would do, and he wholeheartedly agreed. Then we got to the street where I had previously told him I lived. He asked which house was my parents'. I gave him a fake house number, far away from mine, and had him drop me there. He wanted to come inside. I told him I needed to let my parents know about God sending me a husband before he could meet them. I said it would take a few days. Come back tomorrow. He said,
Give you a few minutes, but then we need to be on our way.
I told him to drive around the block so I could have time to pack my clothes. He nodded and finally opened the car door. I ran to that house door, waved to him until he drove away, then sprinted to my house, where I lived alone. double bolted my door, and put the couch in front of it that night. Never saw him again. I did not call the police, though I wish I had. I moved in with my boyfriend a few days later, and I insisted on waiting at work until he could pick me up every night.